I'm Shazia Carr, the Business Engagement Manager at the Alzheimer Society, and I'm pleased to be joined by Sanjay Patel, the Group CIO from Tate and Lyle, and Rob Howe, who's the VP of Operations at the Guinness World Records. So this morning, we'll be talking about the continued influence and role of IT within our businesses, how they influence growth, and strategic objectives. So we'll be looking at and discussing the key aspects of the relationships between IT and the business, how we define our strategies, and what role we as leaders have to play in seeing this through and learning from how we deliver it. So, before we get going with the discussion, can I just have a show of hands? How many of you are working on your strategy at the moment or writing a technology roadmap? Quite a few. So it's a hot topic for now. And Rob and Sanjay, are you writing your strategies?
We are, and we're actually evolving the strategy. So maybe a bit more of an introduction. So I'm, as you say, Group CIO Tate and Lyle, and just to set the scene, Tate and Lyle, we were in sugars. One of the things that we have constantly correcting people on is we're no longer in sugar. In fact, we've taken over 9 trillion calories out of foods and beverages because we replace sugar with alternatives. So we do still do sweeteners. And the reason I put that context in place is the IT strategy really is based on where the business is going. And so we spend a lot of time, one, business partnering. We do that at the functional level as well as at the regional level. And secondly, driving what we do as IT on the basis of where the business is going. At the moment, we're in the middle of splitting the business, so we're taking a chunk of our business and selling it off to private equity, and so we're having to evolve the IT strategy accordingly, and that makes a big difference in terms of where we were 2 years ago. So yes, we are constantly evolving the strategy as the business changes.
Okay, and what about yourself, Rob?
We've had a similar strategy for the past 9 years as I've been with the business, which is to empower our workforce and to support all aspects of our business, because most people don't realise we aren't just a publishing house. We have a creative agency arm who work with businesses across the world. We have a video team. We have attractions, a Guinness World Records adventure in the US that via one of our sister companies. So there's lots of aspects to GWR that makes it a very complicated beast. And so our strategy is all about putting IT front and centre. We help drive the business forward and working and partnering with all the key players. So, for example, we have a consultancy, they call it a task force, where we're currently reviewing the whole process of how we sell. And I'm on that team as a key player and making sure that I'm partnering up properly. And the strategy that I have always does that, and the technology is then just folded in as part of the strategy.
And so I've got a question for both of you, and I guess it's one that as leaders we have to always consider. How do you know you're working on the right strategy or you've got the right approach?
So I think it's the same question we would have of the business. So it's the same theme as before. IT is just another function. So it's the same question you ask to finance or HR or sales or commercial or R&D. How do we know we're working on the right things? And part of the role of leaders, in my view, is to work with the other leaders to ensure that collectively you're driving towards the same business goals. So if our business goal is driving growth or breaking into a new market, then that's where the focus needs to be. And part of the challenge I see as leaders is when you've got teams of people who are globally distributed, trying to maintain that set of priorities on an ongoing basis. So one of the things we do is we have a monthly all hands town hall, call it what you want. So all of the IT members on a single call at a time of day that means that the majority of them could join. And every time we're reiterating what are the priorities. So it's a regular drumbeat and a reinforcement of what matters. But it's something we have to do cross-functionally. So in every meeting, another function comes along to, one, help to educate the team, and two, just to reinforce what that particular function is working on. And then lastly, as I said before, the organisation that we've put in place is that we've got functional alignment, because we do have global functions, and regional alignment. And so we have business partners sitting in the function, typically at the leadership team, so the functional leadership team for finance or HR or otherwise. And we have regional business partners, again, typically sitting at the regional leadership team. And when you have those dynamics coming together, you are able to then make trade-offs as to whether, you know, a functional agenda overrules a regional agenda, or there's a, you know, conflict, in which case, you know, there's an arbitration in terms of what's the priority. So it's constantly staying in touch with what's happening in the outside world, which is what's driving the business. Because we're just another function, so this concept of IT and the business is something I'm trying to kill the language of, right? We are the business, we just happen to be a function called IT. And so the question isn't how do we stay in touch with what's going on and prioritise, it's how does the business collectively work together? And the same way you talk about a business partner.
Yeah, and we do the same. So I'm constantly in touch with head of marketing, head of product, and involved very, very intimately with those teams. So we know what products are coming down the line. We're working out whether do we need to develop something there? Do we need to put resource there, or is it something we've already got in our bag of tricks that we can just deploy? So when it comes to our strategy, it's a constant iterative cycle. Working with these people and reviewing ourselves and not being afraid to make a mistake and go down the wrong path. And we experimented last year with some video editing in the cloud, and didn't work out. Was a nice idea, but it was the fact that we weren't afraid to give it a go, and then also have the courage to go, it didn't work, let's not just keep ploughing on regardless. So that's it's not a case of how do you know you're doing the right thing. It's follow the business plan that we already feed into, and don't be afraid to take course corrections where needed.
So do you see yourselves as service providers or business enablers? And do you think there's a difference in what that means?
So maybe some controversy, right? I think IT in general is continuing to evolve from being a service provider, and clearly there are elements of every function where you're providing service. Finance is providing service in terms of financial analysis and reporting, HR is providing service in terms of recruitment or otherwise. So I don't think we'll get away from every function, including sales by the way, providing some level of service. But the mindset that we're here to serve the business. Tell us what you want and we'll go build it. Tell us when you want it. Tell us when something's broken and we'll fix it. I think that mindset, from my perspective, has clearly shifted. And it is also not just being a business enabler, it is actually being part of the business. So yes, clearly we enable the business. So maybe bring it into tangible terms. Our IT strategy is mirroring the business strategy, and we're part and parcel of it in the same way that we talk about. So we build the business strategy jointly, but we clearly need to have a functional set of strategic objectives. First and foremost is enabling revenue and margin, which is what one of the business goals is about. There's a second part of it, which is accelerating mergers and acquisitions. We're an acquisitive company. We want to get into more plant-based food and beverage ingredients. We're in tapioca now, we're in stevia, we're exploring other plant-based foods. Those are acquisitions we're going to make, which we then need to be integrating. We also have an automation thrust, which is really around productivity or simplifying the business. There are just too many manual things going on, there's not enough workflow going on, and there's too much paper-based. So again, part of our business is to keep our business as simple as we can as we grow, because as we all know, the larger organizations get, typically the more bureaucratic and more complex they get. So that's another part of our thrust. We're also enabling the cultural change. As we grow, hybrid work is a great example, but we also want to be bold, ambitious, and a bit more agile, a bit more connected to our customers and consumers in terms of the agility to which we can generate new innovation. All of those are elements of the IT strategy. And so it isn't about, serving the business or enabling the business, it is actually about delivering the business strategy. And that's a mindset shift that certainly the whole of my functions had to go through.
Interesting. Do you have the same approach, Rob?
Yeah, it's very similar. We've just got to. I've never believed in we're just a service provider. We're just not there to keep the lights on. I don't like that. And when I take people on and I find they have that mindset, it's kind of a red flag for me, because they're not aspiring to do more. So it's key that my team and myself understand the business, the company, the operation and our customers. And we do things to enable people, but we also create stuff ourselves. So a good example for us was Alexa. Last year we built an Alexa skill. No one asked us to. We drove that initiative. It's a brand building initiative that's attributed to my team rather than the marketing department, the content teams and so on and so forth. We partner with Amazon directly, and so if you use your Alexa tower, that's our content now. When you say, ask Alexa, before it was Wikipedia and you were getting a very dry text response, and again that was us. So we're always looking to help support and enable and empower, that's the key thing for me, empower other departments to use technology without fear, rather than just, it's an IT thing, they're going to sort it out. But also how we can almost become a revenue generating unit ourselves. And we haven't got there quite yet. The Alexa thing is fun and nice and it's brand building, but there's no revenue behind it. But we'll get there.
That's really interesting innovation, and it's interesting to see how you both are maintaining the relationships within your organisation. What about your people? How are you? What are your thoughts on the workforce that you employ, attracting and retaining your talent?
So look, people is a key topic. We noticed, Shazia, we're not really talking about technology. So back to the role of the sort of IT leadership. It really is around people at one level. There are two elements I look at. One is the people within the IT function, but then the other one is the people who are not within the IT function. So I'll give you some examples, right? So part of it is as we touched on earlier on, shifting the mindset of what IT really is about, and that is in people. If my team turn up as service providers or as tell me what you want, if that's the conversation they're having, then there's a job as leaders to shift that conversation to a different one. You touched on it briefly, Rob. So my counsel to my team is really, there are 2 or 3 things I want that to happen. Firstly is we shouldn't have any issues. So take that, something's broken topic off the table. It should just work in the same way as every other function. But then move the conversation on to not what do you need, but here's what we can provide. And part of that is about challenging the other functions and saying, here's what technology can do to meet your objectives. And there's the rub. Historically, my team hasn't really clued in on what the objectives of the other functions are because they're so focused on delivering tech and tech solutions and understanding tech. So part of the mindset shift of people has been really about getting curious about what is the other function doing or what is happening in the region. So say those are the 2 orientations that we focus on. The second part of it is educating the other functions. So not that they become tech savvy themselves, but they have an appreciation and a curiosity about what technology could do. Give an example. So we're also experimenting a great deal because if you don't experiment, then you're not going to learn. And if you don't fail, then you're not going to learn because there's nothing works first time. You're always going to learn. So we've established a stage gate process where we start looking at opportunities jointly with the other functions of where technology could do something that you can't do today. We're a B2B business, so typically we're focused on large food and beverage manufacturing companies, the Nestle's, the Kellogg's, the Mondelez's of the world. But actually they're all serving consumers, all of the people in the audience, all of your children, all of your relatives. And so we've started looking at social sentiment analysis. What's actually happening out there in social media? Otherwise technologically known as big data, because we can do that stuff. So by mining that data and aligning it to where we can make a difference as a company, we can start talking to our customers about innovations or launches that they're making or problems that they're trying to solve for. Cereal producers have too much sugar. Okay? So there's a conversation. How can we help you by reformulating and putting less sugar? But we do that based on what the eating habits are in individual countries or individual age groups. So there's an example where the mindset shift is with the non-IT people to say, actually, wouldn't it be helpful if you could actually understand what your customers were doing and go and have a better conversation with your customer about, well, I know you're trying to tackle this challenge of a new innovation or reduction in sugar or more fiber or, gut microbiota or even getting into plant protein. and have a conversation that says, but because we've used some technology to analyze that situation, here's what we can do for you. And that's both IT people changing their mindset, but also non-IT people changing their mindset in terms of what is the role that technology could do to drive revenue growth on the one hand. We're very similar. We're wanting to move away from the historical, IT is just a cost. How do I reduce the cost? To actually, not IT is an enabler, but actually IT is driving revenue growth. And whether that's through platforms and products, or whether that's through actually working with the front end of the business in terms of driving pricing or margin or new innovations, that shift is all about people and how they work together.
Our focus is very much as well, just trying to get the team away from just coming in, burying their heads in a server, a router, a code base, and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. Because then they get the enthusiasm of the rest of the business. Our business is very broad, I think is the best way to define it, because what we do and the services we provide are quite wide anyway, and then we have customers coming to us with, I've come up with this record idea, so it could be anything someone comes up with. And we try and get people involved in not just enabling the technology aspects, but okay, we've got a customer that's come in and they want to use AI to achieve this. And we get them involved in that, so they have the conversations, and they might even speak to the customers directly, so they get a broader experience than just come in, get your headphones on, and churn through your code or whatever you're doing today. And I mean, we actually ban headphones.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Obviously not when we're working at home, but when we're all in the office, it's a collaborative time. And we have, we do spend a lot of time trying to encourage people to think outside the box. I'm really lucky because my role, I've got all the technology teams, but I've also got the guys that create the records and the formats, and they are not tech-based at all. And so getting those two teams, and we're not there yet at all, but I want to get those teams to cross-pollinate their ideas, because they're a very creative bunch of people and a very traditional tech bunch of people. And when they work together, they come up with some very good offerings.
That's really, really interesting. What types of collaborative tools are you using, or methods?
A lot of it is based around agile development, because that's my past and it's worked for me there. It works when you apply it to infrastructure, and it actually works in most fields. So we use that as a framework, and then we go from there, and we don't build it around the tools, we build it around people talking. So it's not about, have you filled out your documentation? It's about the conversation. Have you understood each other? Play back what you've just heard and get them to build bridges across, rather than the tools that you use. I almost don't care what tools they use. It's, are they having that conversation, and are they thinking about what they're actually doing, rather than just blindly following some instructions?
Do you have any interesting collaborative methods or tools?
We do, I mean, very similar, right? So moving away from ask what the requirements are, build it, and then test it, to more, what we describe as if you do painting by numbers, okay? So you know what the shape of the thing needs to be, but do it in an iterative way. And part of that is the point that was made earlier on, which is actually working together with the other function. Because what we find is that people don't really know what they want. They can describe it, but they don't really know. And then when something gets produced, it's not quite in touch, so you're backwards and forwards. Whereas if you build it together, and again, whether there's technologies, DevOps tools, or agile spreadsheets or otherwise, it's less about the tools, it's more about the way of working. So daily stand-ups, having scrums, having functional teams that work together, not waiting for them to do testing after the event, but actually trying to do it in sort of mock environment. All of those, I think, techniques are well known. You touched on something earlier, Shazia, I wanted to come back to, about people recruiting, retaining people. One of the challenges that I'm facing is not really around retention. That used to be a challenge once upon a time, particularly when we're a relatively small company and we don't have, headroom for everyone to be promoted every year or every 2 years, which seems to be the theme, right? So we've had to redesign roles to make them broader. And that's worked very successfully because we've actually promoted more people in the last 3 years than previous 15 because we've given them breadth rather than depth. And they're not just waiting for their boss to keel over or leave. There's other opportunities that they can go after. But alongside that, where people grow, we've also brought in new people to bring in some fresh thinking, to bring in some challenge, to bring in some, why can't we do it this way? Because we've got people who've been in the function and in the company for 30 years, 40 years in some cases. This is the way we've always done it. It worked. We've seen leaders come and leaders go, and I'll still be here once you guys are all gone. It's just another flash in the pan. But then bringing in some fresh blood. They said, well, actually, outside of this little world that you've been living in, a lot of things have moved on, and there are different ways of doing things. So part of the challenge of leadership is to bring the right diversity of thinking and the right diversity of people. And on that topic, whilst I think we're fortunate given the industry that we're in, we're about 25 to 30% female in my function. When I then look at the ethnicity mix, again, if I look around the room, can't conceive that someone here isn't working with some level of Indian provider. And yet when I look at the ethnicity in the top level of my organisation, we don't have that. If I go BAME more broadly, we're a long way away from having what's in the population represented in my function. That's a real challenge because what we found is diversity actually does drive more creativity, more innovation. And I won't pretend that we're all the same in my function because we've changed it a lot, but we have a long way to go in terms of that diversity and creativity representing the people that we're working with and the population that we live in. So I still have a struggle with that. I don't know how you're facing that, Rob.
Yeah, we do have that challenge. We are taking steps to address it. So across the business, we have introduced a new recruitment process to try and reduce the influence of unconscious bias in the recruitment process. And so far it's actually been quite successful. Everyone that's been hired across the whole business this year has been some unusual mix of characters. And it is about bringing those new ideas in, because otherwise you just find it's another developer or it's another one of these, and it's almost like you're going into a shop and picking one off the rack. You need that creativity and the different points of view. So we're a long way away, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's a long road ahead, and we're looking at diversity across our business and how we can better represent all people across the world in our record holders as well, because there is a heavy leaning towards certain ethnicities and genders. Gender not so much, but certainly ethnicity. So we are doing a bunch of initiatives across the board to try and engage with people in a different way and recruit people and look at how we can give them something to aspire to.
I think for me that's certainly something refreshing to hear. And it's interesting to see, no matter what sector you're in, the challenge is still the same. It's using technology to empower your people, whether it's supporting people with dementia or your workforce to work more innovatively or creatively. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to the room. Does anybody have any questions for our panel? Gentleman at the front.
Go back 20 years and CIOs are being told they need to learn about P&Ls and EBITDA and all this sort of malarkey. Given that if you're sitting here now, you really should know that stuff, where would you say is the next area that a CIO should be focusing on? What part of the business, what understanding change do you think we should be getting skills in, or at least some knowledge and understanding of?
So look, I have a point of view. CIO is a business leader at the end of the day, and that's an evolution that's continued, whether it's learning more about the P&L or learning more about sales or marketing or otherwise. And I think that journey needs to continue throughout. I've been a CIO for 3 years. I don't come from an IT background. I actually joined the organisation as head of strategic transformation. So that in and of itself tells you where our organisation is going, which is that we want technology to be an enabler, but we want it driven by people who understand all of the functions of the business. So maybe to answer your question, so finance, quite clearly, I actually run my P&L as a P&L. So I do know my IT P&L, and we have a regular dialogue on that topic. But understanding people and being an HR professional, right? We just talked about recruitment and the diversity of recruitment. We've got a member of our executive team who is now responsible globally for equality, diversity and inclusion. And I have an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Council within IT, which I chair. I also have a People Champions community, which I chair. So being an HR professional and understanding people, their ambitions, et cetera, is similar. Similarly, from a commercial perspective, a CIO sort of needs to understand how sales works, what is sales, and how do good salespeople work, and how do you measure good sales? Because those are all things that we can enable. Similarly for marketing, we happen to be a B2B company, but I've worked with B2C for 20 years. What is the point? What's the return on marketing? And why would you use different channels for marketing as social media in particular evolves? So my view is that it isn't about in the next 20 years the CIO now needs to learn about HR or sales. I think in the next ongoingly, the CIO needs to learn about where the business is going and every element of the business so that you can have that dialogue and challenge around, so why aren't you using technology to enable legal? Why do you have to insist that you have to sign everything? Because actually you don't physically need to sign it. Why is it the C-suite needs to print things off to read it? I'll give you a bigger screen if you want to read it in larger font. So it's challenging every element of the business, saying, well, actually, I understand what you're trying to do. And that's difficult because most often the comment that we used to get is, no, you don't understand. Now we're at a point, so actually we do understand. Let me explain to you what you do and why you do it, and let me explain to you how it could be done differently. Because you all use one of these. Every single one of you uses one of these. But then you come to work and you say, no, actually, I'm not going to use one of these, I'm going to use something different. So that challenge and provocation really only comes by understanding what every other function is doing at a level of detail that allows you to challenge and say, why wouldn't you do it differently? But that's my view, and that's the way I'm running my organisation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've kind of done the opposite path to you. So I started in development and then moved into broader IT, and then a couple of years ago, as I've mentioned, I've got non-IT teams now. And part of the reason that I've moved to a broader sense is the feedback I had was, well, you understand the business, you understand what we're doing as a company, and you understand the processes, and you're just using the tech as a tool to achieve stuff. And I think that's what we all need to sort of step up and do. Understand sales, understand how it all works, how it all fits together for your organisation, and focus on what is the key area that you don't understand now. So it's a very personal thing, rather than in 20 years you need to understand X, Y, Z.
The only reason I was asking is that noticeably over the last 5 years, and seeing your organisation slightly different, is I mentor kind of aspiring kind of junior ceiling, and they were bitching and moaning that half their budget disappeared to marketing because everything's now gone digital. And I did a talk a few years ago. We put up half a dozen marketing terms, so snackable content, so they make all this lot, and I would suggest maybe 10% of the room, which was predominantly CIOs, had any clue what those words meant. And I said, well, that's why your budget has gone over there.
Yeah.
And do you have and obviously you're managing the creative teams, do you have your digital and IT teams working closely?
We have one team, so I established what we call the digital COE. We call it a COE because it's small, right? It's not, we don't actually do all of the development work per se. So yeah, we have that. One of the things I think you touched on is we've also started a few years back bringing in non-IT people into the IT function. And where I'd like to get to is that there is an exchange between the functions. So from a company perspective, again, we're relatively small. We have the same mindset, which is you don't actually just have to go up your functional line. So I've got finance people working in IT. I'd like to get to a point where my IT people are going and working in some of the other functions so that you get that interchange of people as well as within the function. So that is something that we're working on in terms of getting that done. But from a digital perspective, we have a COE, we have a pipeline process, and we have every other function engaged in pilots, back to the learning thing, where we're testing out more and more as we scale into that space.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes left. Did anybody have any other burning questions? No? Oh, one.
Just one, sorry. I've worked with a number of charities over the years, and one of the challenges we face is that the general manager in charities often doesn't like IT, or actively tries to avoid using it where possible because it's not in anything in their specialist skill set. Do you think there's a role in the CIO to educate people in the business? Do you think it's a criteria for employee managers that they have to have some IT expertise?
Shall I take that one, as I'm in the charitable sector? It's a challenge, I think, depending on what organisation you're in. People have varying degrees of literacy, so it is about empowering people to go, here's the technology and how you can use it properly. But then also, I think some of that does have to be within the job description, to say to people, you do have to have some literacy in technology, even if you're a support worker or if you're community-based field worker, and that becomes a challenge because care or whatever charitable organisation you're in doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with being tech savvy. So it's a challenge, but I think everybody must, everyone has to evolve. As CIOs are having to evolve and understand all areas of the organisation, it's just something you have to keep plugging away at. And the way to do that is really giving people the knowledge to use the tools in an effective way, not just going, here you are, have Office 365, or, go and use Teams and work it out.
Yeah, I think making technology more accessible is a core part. So we've renamed one part of my function as user experience and adoption, just to make the point that actually we have a role in ensuring that there is user experience that's good and that there's adoption. So using tech terms doesn't always help, right? Calling projects by the name of the technology of the provider doesn't always help. Why don't you just call it what it is, but also making it accessible. So I agree, we're in the one button pressing thing, right?
Yeah.
Because if one button doesn't do something, then it's too complicated.
Yeah, I have UX analysts and business analysts working together to come up with the requirements, because that's never really been thought of before. UX only sat in marketing and digital. There's a gentleman at the back with a question.
Yeah, sorry, very quickly. To Sanjay, particularly, in terms of this whole move to diversity and inclusion, in around the transition to the CIO becoming more business profession, understanding the whole business, are we also introducing a bias then for people to get that breadth of understanding how people affect the business? Are we just saying then the average age would be somebody in the later 40s and upwards, and so we're cutting out younger people from this going into being the CIO?
No, it's a good point. I mean, you touched on the point. We've done a lot of work on unconscious bias, and we're starting to experiment on how do we remove bias. One extreme is actually, let's only have a short list of candidates that are less than 40 or from all of the diversity that we don't have in the organisation. So positively trying to bring that in. I have a slightly different view, which whilst I agree with that, the best person for the role. The challenge is, how do you know who the best person is if you're unconsciously reading a Mr. or a Miss or a 20-year-old versus a 30-year-old? So trying to remove those biases from the filtering process. And the way we're doing it, just to be tangible out of it, we're interviewing everyone. And that's difficult, right? So you have to have some filtering mechanism in place. But so I recruited a SecOps leader 6 months ago. There were over 200 applications and I had to shut it down. Can't interview 200 people. So trying to remove the biases. By the way, we did recruit. The individual happened to be Italian origin. Again, a role that we didn't have in place. I've just recruited a French person into my leadership team. I have one Indian and I have one Belgian. So from a nationality perspective, we're already there. I think your point is really helpful on the age thing, because I do believe there's a bias there that says you have to have a certain age or a certain amount of experience to be able to do things. We're now wanting to go into schools and universities to bring people in at that age and start exposing, them to us. More importantly, in my opinion, us to them, because I think we significantly undermine what, and I'll call them young people without sort of being non-PC, have to bring to bear, because we presume that they have to have gone through multiple years of industry, or they have to have worked in 3 different places. So we're trying to break that paradigm by just bringing them in and saying, show, not tell. Let's see what people can do and give them the opportunity. But the age one is something we haven't really trodden on, and started working on seriously at the moment.
So I know, well, I could talk to you both all day, but we've actually rapidly run out of time. So do you have any final thoughts or a top tip that you want to give to our audience before we sign off today?
I think there's 2 things. It's make sure you're looking after your people and making sure that they've got opportunities for the future and get them the experience of the rest of the company rather than just hiding away doing technology work all day, every day. And don't be afraid to experiment and fail, because we've both said you can only grow if you fail and learn the lessons. Whereas there is in my experience, there's a slightly strange belief that IT and tech professionals always have to get the right answer first time. And we don't. So don't be afraid to do it. Salespeople might make mistakes in refining their sales process, and the marketing people and the product development teams and all these other teams make mistakes and evolve their services. We should do the same. So don't be afraid.
So a couple of things from my perspective. First one is bring your, I know it's a coin phrase, bring your whole self to the role. So particularly as a leader in technology, as the industry evolves and as the function evolves, it's more important and more important that the leadership is open and transparent and vulnerable. Right? So I have flaws, I'm a human being, but being open to that rather than just being the command and control and look, what I say goes. So I've done a lot of work on personal coaching around getting feedback from the team, around playing back what some of those development areas are and showing that we've all got somewhere to go. So that's one part. And the second part, which is linked at one level, is do some work on what is it that's motivating you to do what you're doing and why, and bring that to bear with all of your people. Which is, I have a very simple view, which is if you don't enjoy what you're doing, then stop doing it. And if you don't enjoy what you're doing, have a conversation about what would it take to actually enjoy what you're doing. Because if you're not coming to work on a regular basis, actually enjoying what you're doing, then why are you coming to work? And that, that's a difficult conversation to have with some people, because they say, well, what do you want me to do? I have to feed the family, etc., etc. So, well, have a conversation about what would it take to actually make the job enjoyable, because that in and of itself, because you're surrounded by diversity, you're in creativity, you've got young and old people together, if whatever it is, actually have a dialogue about it, because that's the first step. And we're having the same conversation on inclusivity and diversity. Step number 1 is actually have a conversation about it. But I'm very simplistic with my team, which is you really do need to be enjoying what you're doing most of the time. Some of the time you won't, but most of the time. And if you're not, let's figure out about how we re-engineer the job to do that, or find a different way of doing it. And if that's not with the organisation, that's okay. Because I'd rather have the majority of the people actually loving what they're doing and coming to work saying, I really enjoy it, I've got opportunities, I'm enjoying the type of work I'm doing, I'm learning, than, actually I don't really want to be here and I'll clock in and I'll clock out. So that's my takeaways, challenge yourself individually, but challenge your people to actually enjoy doing what they're doing.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for your insights today. And we're around in the networking area, so come and talk to us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shazia.